My name is Harper Winslow, and the moment my boss told me my dying father wasn't his problem, something inside me broke forever. What I uncovered about my dad and what I did when I walked back into that office will make you question everything you think you know about revenge. Stay until the end, because you won't believe how far this went. I was 32 years old when my world collapsed on a Tuesday morning in March. The call came at 9:47 a.m. while I was hunched over my desk at Halcyon Logistics Solutions, our mid-sized freight company nestled in the sleepy town of Glendale Creek. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they always did, casting that sickly yellow glow over rows of beige cubicles where dreams went to die. "Miss Winslow?" The voice on the other end was clinical, detached. "This is Dr. Martinez from Mercy General. Your father, Norman Winslow, has taken a turn for the worse. The lung cancer has progressed rapidly. I'm afraid we're looking at days, not weeks." The world tilted sideways. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, sending lukewarm liquid cascading across monthly shipping reports. Around me, the office continued its monotonous rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the copy machine groaning in perpetual malfunction. But for me, time had stopped. "Days," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the office din. "I strongly recommend you come as soon as possible," Dr. Martinez continued. "He's been asking for you." I hung up with trembling hands and stared at the brown stain spreading across my paperwork. 5 years. 5 years my father had been battling this disease, and I'd foolishly believed we had more time, more conversations, more chances to bridge the gap that had widened between us since Mom left when I was 14. Taking a shaky breath, I gathered what remained of my composure and walked the 20 steps to Patrick Doyle's corner office. Patrick was our finance department head, a man who wore his petty power like an expensive suit. At 45, he'd cultivated the look of someone far more important than he actually was. Slicked back hair, designer ties, and a perpetual expression that suggested everyone else was wasting his precious time. I knocked on his glass door, my knuckles barely making a sound against the surface. "What?" Patrick didn't look up from his dual monitors, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the fury of someone who believed every keystroke was changing the world. "Patrick, I need to speak with you about emergency leave." My voice cracked on the word emergency, betraying the calm facade I was desperately trying to maintain. He finally looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowing as they took in my disheveled appearance. "Emergency leave? We're in the middle of quarterly reports. Harper, unless someone's literally dying, it's going to have to wait." The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow. Actually, someone is dying, my father. The doctors say he has days left, and I need to be with him. Patrick leaned back in his leather chair, which squeaked in protest. He steepled his fingers, a gesture I'd seen him use countless times when he wanted to appear thoughtful while delivering particularly cruel verdicts. "That's unfortunate," he said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. However, company policy is clear. Personal leave requests require 2 weeks advance notice. Emergency situations require documentation from a physician and approval from HR. "Patrick, please." I stepped closer to his desk, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "This is my father we're talking about. He's dying. I just need 5 days to be with him. To what?" He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "To sit around a hospital room feeling sorry for yourself? Harper, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but your personal problems aren't the company's responsibility." The words hit me like a slap. I'd worked at Halcyon for 6 years, putting in overtime without complaint, covering for sick colleagues, staying late to ensure Patrick's precious reports were always perfect. And this was how he responded when I needed him most? "I understand it's short notice," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But surely there's some compassion here, some basic human decency." "Human decency?" Patrick's laugh was sharp and humorless. "This is a business, not a charity. If you can't handle your job responsibilities, maybe you should reconsider whether this position is right for you." I stared at him. This man who'd never shown an ounce of warmth in all the years I'd known him, who treated his employees like inconvenient obstacles to his own advancement, who was now telling me that my dying father was essentially a scheduling conflict. "So what are you saying exactly?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm saying you have two choices, Harper. Find someone to cover your workload for the next week, or don't bother coming back at all." He turned back to his computer, dismissing me with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. I stood there for a moment, watching him type, his fingers attacking the keyboard with renewed vigor. Around us, the office hummed with its usual activity, oblivious to the fact that my world was crumbling. Through the glass walls, I could see my coworkers bent over their desks, absorbed in the mundane tasks that suddenly seemed so trivial. "Fine," I said quietly. Patrick glanced up, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Fine what?" "Fine, I quit." The smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I turned and walked back to my desk, Patrick's voice following me. "Harper, let's not be hasty here. I'm sure we can work something out." But I was already pulling personal items from my drawers, stuffing them into the cardboard box I kept under my desk for just such an occasion. Not that I'd ever imagined this scenario. In my darkest moments, I'd fantasized about dramatic resignations, about telling Patrick exactly what I thought of him and his management style. But this wasn't how I'd pictured it. This was raw and desperate and fueled by a grief that hadn't even fully hit me yet. "Harper." Patrick appeared at my cubicle, his voice lower now, more conciliatory. "Let's talk about this rationally. You're upset, which is understandable, but walking out isn't going to solve anything." I looked up at him, this man who'd just denied me the chance to say goodbye to my father, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "You're right," I said, continuing to pack. "Walking out won't solve anything, but staying here, working for someone who thinks my father's death is an inconvenience, that would solve even less." "You're making a mistake," Patrick said, his voice taking on that familiar edge of irritation. "Jobs aren't easy to come by in Glendale Creek. You'll regret this decision." I sealed the box with tape from my desk dispenser and stood to face him. "The only thing I regret is wasting 6 years of my life in this place." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel the eyes of my coworkers following me. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious. A few seemed envious, as if they wished they had the courage to make the same dramatic exit, but none of them said anything. None of them stood up for me or questioned Patrick's decision. They just watched as I pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the parking lot, my career at Halcyon Logistics Solutions officially over. The drive to Mercy General was a blur of tears and angry radio music. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands cramped, replaying the conversation with Patrick over and over in my mind. Each repetition made me angrier, but also more determined. I would not let his callousness poison my last days with my father. Dad was awake when I arrived, though barely. The cancer had hollowed him out, transforming the sturdy man who'd raised me into something fragile and insubstantial. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and he managed a weak smile. "Harper," he whispered, his voice like rustling paper. "You came." "Of course I came, Dad." I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand, which felt like tissue paper over bird bones. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Over the next 4 days, I rarely left his side. We talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, his regrets about Mom leaving, my fears about the future. He told me stories I'd never heard before, about his youth, his dreams, the choices that had led him to become the quiet, careful man I'd always known. On Friday evening, as the sun painted the hospital walls gold, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Harper," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in days. "There are things I never told you. Important things." "Dad, save your strength." "No." His grip tightened. "Listen to me. In my apartment, there's a safe. Behind the painting of the lighthouse. The combination is your birthday, month, day, year. Inside, you'll find You'll find things that will change how you see everything. His eyes were intense, almost desperate. Promise me you'll look. Promise me you'll understand. I promise, Dad. But what are you talking about? What kind of things? But he was already drifting back to sleep. The brief surge of energy spent. I sat with him through the night, holding his hand and wondering what secrets my quiet, unassuming father could possibly be harboring. He died at dawn on Saturday, slipping away so peacefully I almost didn't realize it had happened. One moment he was breathing, the next, he wasn't. Just like that, the man who'd shaped my entire world was gone. And I was alone. The funeral was held on Tuesday at Glendale Creek Memorial Gardens, a modest affair befitting Dad's simple life. I'd expected it to be sparsely attended. Dad had been a private man with few close friends, but I was still struck by how empty the chapel felt. A handful of neighbors, his former boss from the accounting firm where he'd worked for 30 years before retiring, and me. That was it. As the service concluded and I watched his casket being lowered into the ground, I noticed two men standing apart from the small group of mourners. They were both tall, wearing identical gray suits that looked expensive. One was younger, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and sharp features. The other was older, with silver at his temples and the kind of bearing that suggested military or law enforcement background. What struck me as odd was how they positioned themselves, far enough away to avoid being obvious, but close enough to observe everything. They didn't approach me during the service, didn't sign the guest book, didn't offer condolences. They simply watched, their faces impassive, until the ceremony ended. Then, they disappeared. I told myself they were probably just cemetery staff or perhaps distant colleagues of Dad's I didn't recognize. But something about their presence nagged at me as I drove back to his small apartment to begin the grim task of sorting through his belongings. Dad had lived simply. His one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house was clean but sparse, furnished with the kind of practical pieces that prioritized function over form. The walls were bare except for a few framed photographs and a single piece of art, a painted seascape featuring a lighthouse on a rocky coast. I'd always assumed it was just a decorative piece he'd picked up somewhere, but now I found myself staring at it with new interest. This was what he'd mentioned in the hospital, the painting behind which I'd find his safe. With trembling hands, I lifted the frame from its hooks. Sure enough, there was a small wall safe embedded in the plaster, its digital display glowing softly in the dim light. My birthday, 06/18/1992. The lock clicked open with a soft beep. Inside, I found things that made no sense. There were several leather-bound notebooks filled with Dad's precise handwriting, columns of numbers, dates, locations, names I didn't recognize. There were photographs of buildings, license plates, people walking in and out of offices. There was a stack of business cards from companies I'd never heard of, many with phone numbers written on the back in Dad's careful script. But most puzzling of all was a letter addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, sealed in an envelope marked, "If anything happens to me." My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Harper," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably confused by what you found. I need you to know that everything I did to protect people like you, honest, hard-working people who deserve better than they get from companies that see them as expendable. I wasn't just a retired accountant. Harper, for the past 8 years, I've been working as an undercover investigator for the Federal Anti-Fraud Commission. My assignment was to infiltrate the financial networks of mid-sized companies suspected of money laundering, embezzlement, and fraud. Companies like Halcyon Logistics Solutions. I know this comes as a shock. I know you must feel betrayed that I never told you the truth. But I had to protect you. And ironically, your job at Halcyon gave me the perfect cover. Who would suspect the father of a low-level administrative assistant of being a federal investigator? Over the years, I've documented extensive evidence of financial crimes at Halcyon. Your boss, Patrick Doyle, is at the center of an elaborate scheme to siphon money from the company through fraudulent shipping manifests and phantom overseas accounts. But the evidence is encrypted on a secure drive, and only I know the access codes. If something has happened to me, and if you're reading this, then the responsibility falls to you. The notebooks contain clues to the encryption key. The truth is all there, Harper. The question is, what will you do with it? I read the letter 3 times, each pass making it more surreal. My father, quiet, careful Norman Winslow, who'd spent 30 years pushing pencils at Morrison and Associates, had been a federal investigator. The man who'd taught me to balance a checkbook and always told me to keep my head down and avoid trouble had been secretly building cases against white-collar criminals. And Patrick Doyle, the man who'd denied me emergency leave to be with my dying father, was apparently a criminal himself. I spent the rest of the evening poring over Dad's notebooks, trying to make sense of his coded entries. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge. The numbers corresponded to shipping container codes. The dates matched up with manifests I'd processed at Halcyon. The names were shell companies and overseas contacts. My father had been using me, unknowingly, as his inside source. Every report I'd filed, every manifest I'd processed, every piece of mundane paperwork that crossed my desk had potentially been part of his investigation. I thought about all the times he'd asked casual questions about my work, all the times I'd complained about discrepancies in the shipping records that didn't seem important enough to report. He'd been listening, he'd been building a case, and now he was gone, leaving me with a decision that felt impossibly heavy. The next morning, I was awakened by a knock at Dad's apartment door. I'd fallen asleep on his couch, surrounded by notebooks and photographs, still wearing the black dress from his funeral. The knock was firm, but not aggressive, the kind of knock that suggested official business. I opened the door to find the younger of the 2 men from the cemetery standing in the hallway. Up close, he looked even more like law enforcement, clean-shaven, alert eyes that took in everything, the kind of posture that suggested he was always ready for trouble. Ms. Winslow, my name is Cameron Stroud. I'm a federal investigator with the Anti-Fraud Commission. I was your father's handler. I stared at him, Dad's letter still fresh in my mind. Prove it. He showed me his credentials, then gestured toward the living room. May I come in? We have a lot to discuss. Over coffee that neither of us touched, Cameron filled in the gaps in Dad's story. The investigation into Halcyon had been ongoing for years. Triggered by suspicious financial patterns flagged by the IRS, Dad had volunteered for the undercover assignment because his accounting background made him a perfect fit. And my job at the company provided natural cover. Your father was one of our best investigators, Cameron said, his voice heavy with genuine respect. Methodical, patient, brilliant at connecting dots that others missed. He was close to wrapping up the Halcyon case when he got sick, I finished. Yes, the last time we spoke, he mentioned he'd documented everything we needed to bring charges, but the evidence is encrypted, and without the access codes, the case dies with him, I said. Cameron nodded grimly. Unless you can help us. I told him about the notebooks, the photographs, the letter. His eyes lit up as I described what I'd found, but his expression grew troubled when I mentioned the encryption. Your father was paranoid about security, which was smart given what he was investigating, but it means all our evidence is locked away unless we can crack his codes. What kind of codes are we talking about? Knowing Norman, probably something personal. A date, a phrase, something meaningful to him that wouldn't be obvious to anyone else. Cameron leaned forward. Did he ever mention anything about passwords or security? Any habits he had with numbers or words? I thought back to Dad's careful ways, his obsession with precision and order. He always said the most important things were hidden in plain sight, that people make mysteries out of simple truths. Cameron looked hopeful. That's a start. Would you be willing to work with us to try to crack the encryption? I know this is a lot to ask, especially after everything you've been through. What happens to Patrick if we succeed? I interrupted. If the evidence is as comprehensive as your father indicated, Patrick Doyle will spend the next decade in federal prison, along with several of his associates. The man who denied me the chance to say goodbye to my father, who treated me like an inconvenience, who'd made me choose between my job and my family. never knowing that my family was already sacrificing everything to bring him down. "I'll help," I said. That evening, I returned to my own apartment for the first time since Dad's death. It felt strange and unfamiliar, as if I'd been gone for months instead of days. I fed my cat, checked my mail, and tried to process everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Patrick. Harper. I may have been hasty yesterday. If you're interested in discussing your return to Halcyon, call me. We can work something out." I stared at the message, feeling a surge of anger so pure it almost knocked me over. Now he wanted to work something out? Now? When it was too late to matter? I deleted the message without responding. The next morning, I drove to Halcyon for the first time since my dramatic exit. The parking lot looked the same, the building looked the same, but everything felt different now. I wasn't just Harper Winslow, disgraced former employee. I was Harper Winslow, daughter of a federal investigator, keeper of secrets that could bring down the entire corrupt structure of this place. Patrick's face went through several expressions when he saw me walk through the front door. Surprise, confusion, and then a calculating look that suggested he was already planning how to spin my return to his advantage. "Harper," he said, approaching me with what I supposed was meant to be a conciliatory smile. "I'm glad you decided to come back. I think we got off on the wrong foot last week." "I'm not here to beg for my job back, Patrick." His smile faltered slightly. "Oh, then why are you here?" "I need to clean out my desk properly. I left some personal items behind." It was a lie, but a believable one. Patrick nodded and gestured toward my old cubicle. "Of course, take all the time you need." What I really needed was access to the computer system. Dad's notebooks had given me insight into Patrick's methods, but I needed current data to complete the picture. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and Patrick would realize what I was actually doing. I spent the morning going through the motions of packing imaginary personal items while surreptitiously accessing shipping records and financial reports. Patrick had gotten sloppy over the years, probably because he thought no one was paying attention. The discrepancies were there if you knew what to look for. Phantom shipping containers that existed on paper but never actually moved. Invoices for services that were never performed. Money flowing to overseas accounts with no legitimate business purpose. It was all there, hidden in the mundane bureaucracy of freight logistics. By lunchtime, I had downloaded everything I needed to a flash drive. I was about to leave when Patrick appeared at my cubicle again. "Find everything you were looking for?" he asked. There was something in his tone that made me look up sharply. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Just some old photos and personal papers," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Right." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, Harper, I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about your father." My blood chilled. "What about him?" "It occurred to me after you left that I might have been insensitive. Losing a parent is never easy, and I should have been more understanding." Was this an apology from Patrick Doyle? Something felt wrong. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "I'd like to make it up to you. What would you say to coming back to work? Full pay, full benefits, and I'll even authorize bereavement leave retroactively so there's no gap in your employment record." The offer was so out of character for Patrick that alarm bells started ringing in my head. This was the man who'd never shown an ounce of compassion in all the years I'd known him. Now he was practically groveling. "Why?" I asked bluntly. He looked taken aback. "Why what? Why are you suddenly being so generous? Last week you told me my father's death wasn't your problem. Now you want to give me bereavement leave and my job back? What changed?" Patrick's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and dangerous in his expression. Then the false smile returned. "I told you, I realized I was being insensitive. Can't a man admit when he's wrong?" "Sure," I said, standing up and slinging my purse over my shoulder. "But you've never been that kind of man before, Patrick, which makes me wonder what you're really after." I walked away before he could respond, but I could feel his eyes following me all the way to the parking lot. That evening, Cameron and I met at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town to review what I'd collected. His excitement was palpable as he scrolled through the files I'd downloaded. "This is incredible," he said. "Your father's groundwork combined with this current data, we've got enough to bring RICO charges. This goes way beyond simple embezzlement." "RICO?" I asked. Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's designed for taking down organized crime operations. What Patrick and his associates have been doing isn't just theft. It's a systematic criminal enterprise. I felt a surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by a chill of fear. "Cameron, I think Patrick suspects something. He offered me my job back today, which is completely out of character for him." Cameron's expression grew serious. "What exactly did he say?" I recounted the conversation, including Patrick's sudden shift from callousness to false concern. Cameron listened intently, his frown deepening with each detail. "You're right to be suspicious," he said when I finished. "Men like Patrick don't suddenly develop consciences. If he's trying to bring you back into the fold, it's because he thinks you're a threat." "But how could he know? I was careful." "These people didn't build a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise by being stupid. Harper, Patrick survived as long as he has because he's paranoid and ruthless. If he senses even a hint of danger, he'll act to protect himself." A cold knot formed in my stomach. What kind of action are we talking about? Cameron was quiet for a long moment. "The kind that made your father so careful about security. The kind that means we need to move fast." We spent the next hour working on Dad's encryption, using clues from his notebooks and what I knew about his personal history. It was frustrating work. Every combination I tried failed. Every password was rejected. But gradually, patterns began to emerge from Dad's coded notes. "Try this," Cameron said, pointing to a series of numbers that appeared repeatedly in the notebooks. 06 per 18 78. I typed the numbers into the decryption program. Nothing. "What's significant about those dates?" Cameron asked. "The first one is my birthday," I said, "but I don't know what 78 could be." We tried various combinations, adding years, subtracting numbers, rearranging sequences. Nothing worked. I was starting to think we'd never crack Dad's security when something he'd said in the hospital came back to me. "The most important things are hidden in plain sight," I murmured. "What?" "Something Dad always said, that people make mysteries out of simple truths." I looked at the notebooks again, this time focusing not on the complex codes, but on the simple elements. Dates, names, locations. And then I saw it. Not in the coded sections, but in the margins where Dad had made casual notes. A single word, written in his careful script. Lighthouse. The painting in his apartment, the lighthouse on the rocky coast. It had been his screensaver at work, his bookmark in the books he read, the image on the coffee mug he used every morning. I typed "lighthouse" into the decryption program, and the locked files opened like a flower blooming. What we found inside was even more damning than Cameron had hoped. Dad hadn't just documented Patrick's financial crimes, he'd uncovered an entire network of corruption that extended far beyond Halcyon logistics. Shell companies, money laundering operations, connections to organized crime figures in 3 states. But the most shocking revelation came in the final files. Patrick wasn't just stealing from Halcyon, he was planning to destroy the company entirely. A carefully orchestrated bankruptcy that would eliminate evidence while allowing him and his associates to walk away with millions in hidden assets. "When is this supposed to happen?" Cameron asked, scrolling through the timeline Dad had constructed. "According to this, next month, he's been systematically transferring assets to offshore accounts while loading the company with fake debt. When it collapses, he'll disappear with enough money to live comfortably anywhere in the world." Cameron sat back in his chair, whistling softly. "Your father wasn't just investigating fraud, he was uncovering a conspiracy that would have destroyed hundreds of jobs and wiped out employee pensions." The full weight of what Dad had been doing hit me. This wasn't just about catching a white-collar criminal. This was about protecting people like me, ordinary workers who trusted their employers to be honest, who put their savings into company retirement plans, who believed that hard work would be rewarded with security. Patrick hadn't just denied me emergency leave. He'd been planning to steal the futures of everyone who worked at Halcyon. "What do we do now?" I asked. Cameron closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression that was part admiration, part concern. "Now we finish what your father started. But Harper, I need you to understand something. Once we move forward with this, there's no going back. Patrick and his associates will know you were involved. And men with this much to lose don't just accept defeat quietly." I thought about Dad, dying alone while I fought for the right to be with him. I thought about Patrick's cold dismissal of my pain, his casual cruelty towards someone who'd worked faithfully for him for years. I thought about all the other employees at Halcyon who had no idea their boss was planning to destroy their livelihoods. "My father spent 8 years of his life building this case," I said. "He died before seeing justice done. If I don't finish what he started, then his sacrifice was meaningless." Cameron nodded slowly. "All right then. Here's what we're going to do." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than wait for the formal investigation to play out through proper channels, a process that could take months and might give Patrick time to cover his tracks, we were going to force his hand. Cameron had contacts in the Financial Crimes Division who could expedite the process if they had probable cause for immediate action. What we needed was evidence of active, ongoing criminal activity. Something that proved Patrick was continuing his schemes right now, not just that he had committed crimes in the past. My job was to get that evidence. "I need you to accept his job offer," Cameron explained. "Go back to work, act grateful for his generosity, and document everything he does over the next week. With your father's background information and real-time evidence of current activity, we'll have an airtight case." It was dangerous, but it was also poetic. Patrick wanted me back at Halcyon because he thought I was harmless. He had no idea that I was about to become the instrument of his destruction. The next morning, I called Patrick and told him I'd reconsidered his offer. He seemed pleased but not surprised, as if he'd never doubted I would come crawling back. "I knew you'd see reason," he said when I arrived at the office. "Welcome back, Harper. Let's put all that unpleasantness behind us." If only he knew. I threw myself into the role of grateful, subservient employee. I thanked Patrick repeatedly for his generosity. I praised his leadership and apologized for my emotional outburst after Dad's death. I even brought him coffee and asked for his advice on personal matters. It was sickening, but it worked. Within days, Patrick's guard was completely down. He started treating me like a confidant, sharing details about company operations that he never would have revealed before. He complained about regulatory interference and government overreach. He joked about creative accounting and offshore investment opportunities. He had no idea I was recording every conversation. By the end of the week, I had documented enough current criminal activity to justify immediate federal intervention. Patrick had personally authorized fraudulent shipping manifests, transferred company funds to unauthorized accounts, and discussed plans to accelerate the timeline for Halcyon's engineered collapse. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. On Friday afternoon, I was organizing files in Patrick's office when I discovered a folder marked Insurance Confidential. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Patrick had taken out keyman life insurance policies on several employees, including me. But these weren't standard corporate policies designed to protect the company if crucial employees died or became disabled. These were policies that would pay out massive sums if the insured employees died under specific circumstances that Patrick seemed to be engineering. According to the documents, I had been targeted for workplace accident that would trigger a $2 million insurance payout. The plan was to stage my death during the company's collapse, making it look like I had discovered the financial irregularities and been killed trying to expose them. Patrick would collect the insurance money while eliminating the one person who might have connected him to the crimes. The man hadn't just refused to let me say goodbye to my dying father. He'd been planning to murder me. I photographed every document with trembling hands, then carefully returned the folder to its original position. I had to get out of the office immediately, but I couldn't act suspicious. Patrick was watching me more closely now. and any sign of unusual behavior might trigger his paranoia. I made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, going through the motions of normal office routine while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd discovered. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, I gathered my things with careful normalcy and walked to the parking lot like any other day. Patrick was waiting by my car. "Harper," he said, his voice friendly but his posture tense. I was hoping we could chat for a moment. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to smile. "Of course, Patrick. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about your father," he said, moving closer. "About his death, and the timing of everything. It's interesting how you left the company right after he passed, and now you're back, almost like you were waiting for something." I kept my expression neutral, but my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do." His friendly mask was slipping, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "I think your father told you things before he died. Things about his work, his real work." The game was over. Patrick knew, or at least suspected, who Dad really was. There was no point in pretending anymore. "What do you want, Patrick?" He smiled, but it was the smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "I want to know how much you know, and who you've told, and I want to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The kind that keeps you alive," he said quietly. "Your father was very thorough, Harper, very careful. But he made one mistake. He trusted you with information that could destroy a lot of important people who don't like being exposed." I glanced around the parking lot, hoping to see other employees leaving the building. But the lot was empty, except for our 2 cars. "Here's what's going to happen," Patrick continued. "You're going to tell me everything you know about your father's investigation. You're going to give me any evidence you might have collected. And in return, I'm going to let you walk away from all of this with enough money to start a new life somewhere far from here. And if I refuse?" His smile widened. "Then, tomorrow morning, the police will find your body in a tragic car accident. Brake failure, probably. These mountain roads can be so dangerous, especially for someone who's been under a lot of emotional stress lately." I stared at him. This man I'd worked for, who'd known me for years, who was now casually discussing my murder as if it were a routine business decision. "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm practical," he corrected. "Your father spent years thinking he was so clever, so careful, but he never realized that we knew about him almost from the beginning. We let him think he was investigating us while we fed him just enough real information to keep him busy. The only reason we didn't eliminate him sooner was because his cancer was doing the job for us." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. Dad had died thinking he was close to bringing down a criminal empire, never knowing that his targets had been manipulating him all along. "But then you had to complicate things," Patrick continued. "Walking into that office, asking questions, accessing files you had no business touching. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" My phone was in my purse, and Cameron's number was on speed dial. If I could somehow signal for help— "Don't even think about it," Patrick said, as if reading my mind. "Give me your phone." I had no choice but to comply. He took the device and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little drive together, somewhere quiet where we can have a proper conversation about your father's files and who you might have shared them with." This was it. If I got in a car with Patrick, I would never be seen alive again. But if I tried to run, he might kill me right here in the parking lot. The sun was setting, and the building's security cameras had been malfunctioning for weeks, another detail that now seemed ominously significant. "Patrick," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't want to do this. Killing me won't solve your problems. Other people know about the investigation." "Do they?" He tilted his head, studying my face. "I don't think so. Harper, I think you've been playing lone wolf, just like your father. I think you haven't told anyone anything because you're not even sure what you've stumbled into." He was partially right, but not completely. Cameron knew some of what I'd discovered, but not everything. And he certainly didn't know about the insurance fraud or Patrick's plans for my death. Get in the car, Patrick said, pulling keys from his pocket. We'll take mine. I looked at his black sedan, then back at him. This was my last chance to do something, anything, to save myself. But what? I wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained in self-defense. I was just an administrative assistant who'd gotten in way over her head. Then I remembered something Dad had written in one of his notebooks. The best weapon against criminals is often their own arrogance. All right, I said, moving toward his car. But Patrick, before we go anywhere, I need you to know something. He paused, his hand on the driver's door handle. What? You're too late. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I mean the evidence is already in federal hands. I've been working with the FBI for the past week, and they know everything. About the money laundering, the shell companies, the insurance fraud, all of it. It was mostly true, though I stretched the timeline and the extent of federal involvement, but Patrick didn't know that. You're lying, he said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Then why do you think I came back to work for you? Did you really believe I'd crawl back after the way you treated me? I came back because federal agents asked me to gather evidence of ongoing criminal activity. Every conversation we've had this week has been recorded. Patrick's face had gone pale. Recorded how? I gestured toward the building. Did you really think those security cameras were broken by accident? The feds have had this place under surveillance for months. They've been watching you, listening to you, documenting every crime you've committed. It was a complete lie, but Patrick's paranoia made it plausible. He looked up at the building's exterior, searching for hidden cameras that didn't exist. Even if that were true, he said, his voice less confident now. It doesn't matter. Without your father's encrypted files... You mean these files? I pulled the flash drive from my purse, the one containing all of Dad's decrypted evidence. The encryption was cracked days ago. Patrick, the feds have everything. His face twisted with rage and fear. Give me that drive. No. Give it to me, or I'll kill you right here. Go ahead, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Kill me in full view of the federal surveillance team that's been watching this building. I'm sure that will improve your legal situation. Patrick looked around wildly, trying to spot the imaginary agents I'd claimed were observing us. His careful composure was cracking, replaced by the desperate panic of a cornered animal. You're bluffing, he said, but he no longer sounded certain. Then call my bluff, I challenged. Take out your gun, or your knife, or whatever you brought to kill me with. Do it right here, right now, and see what happens. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the darkening parking lot. Patrick's hand moved toward his jacket, and I tensed, ready to run if he actually produced a weapon. But then he seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging as the fight went out of him. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want justice for my father. I want justice for all the people you've stolen from. And I want you to pay for every cruel, heartless thing you've done. He looked up at the building again, then back at me. If I cooperate, if I tell you everything, what happens to me? That's not my decision to make, I said. But I imagine federal prison is better than whatever your organized crime friends will do to you when they realize you've been exposed. Patrick was quiet for a long moment, processing his options. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. This contains recordings of conversations with my associates, he said, holding it out to me. Names, dates, account numbers, everything. It was my insurance policy, in case they ever tried to eliminate me. I took the recorder, hardly believing this was actually happening. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're right about one thing, he said bitterly. Once this all comes out, I'm a dead man either way. At least in federal custody. I might live long enough to see some of them go down with me. As if summoned by my earlier lies, headlights suddenly swept across the parking lot. 3 black SUVs pulled in, disgorging a team of federal agents in tactical gear. Cameron emerged from the lead vehicle, his face grim but relieved. Harper, he called out. Are you all right? I looked at Patrick, who seemed almost relieved to see the approaching agents. "How did you know to come?" I asked Cameron. "You missed your check-in call," he explained. "When we couldn't reach you, we traced your phone to this location and moved in." The next few hours were a blur of statements, evidence collection, and formal arrests. Patrick was taken into custody without resistance, as were several of his associates who were rounded up in coordinated raids across 3 states. The recorder he'd given me contained even more damning evidence than Dad's files. Conversations that implicated judges, politicians, and business leaders in a corruption network that stretched far beyond Halcyon logistics. As dawn broke over Glendale Creek, I found myself sitting in Cameron's SUV, watching as Halcyon's offices were sealed with federal evidence tape. It was over. The investigation that had cost Dad his life was finally complete. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we build the strongest RICO case in federal history," Cameron said. "Patrick and his associates will spend the rest of their lives in prison. The stolen money will be recovered and returned to victims, and Halcyon's employees will get the justice they deserve." "What about the company itself?" "It'll probably be restructured under federal oversight, new management, clean books, honest operations. Most of the legitimate employees will keep their jobs." I thought about my former co-workers, people who'd worked honestly for years while their boss systematically looted the company. They deserved better than Patrick Doyle, and now they'd get it. "Harper," Cameron said quietly, "there's something else you should know. The insurance policies Patrick took out, they weren't just on you. He had similar policies on 12 other employees, all people who might have discovered his crimes. You probably saved a lot of lives by exposing this when you did. 12 other people. 12 other families who would have suffered the same loss I had, if Patrick's plans had succeeded." The weight of that responsibility was staggering, but also oddly comforting. Dad's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. A week later, I stood in the cemetery where Dad was buried, placing fresh flowers on his grave. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates, with an inscription that read, "Beloved Father and Truth Seeker." I finished it. "Dad," I said quietly, "your investigation, your case, it's done. Patrick and his entire network are going to prison. The people he stole from are getting their money back. Justice is finally served." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could almost imagine it was Dad's voice, telling me he was proud. I'd been offered a position with the Federal Anti-Fraud Commission, following in Dad's footsteps as an undercover investigator. The irony wasn't lost on me. The job I'd lost because of Patrick's cruelty had led me to a career that was far more meaningful than anything I could have achieved at Halcyon. But first, I had one more thing to do. The next morning, I drove to the federal courthouse where Patrick was being held pending trial. I'd requested a meeting through his public defender, and somewhat to my surprise, he'd agreed to see me. He looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller, older, defeated. The arrogant executive who denied me emergency leave was gone, replaced by a broken man facing the rest of his life behind bars. "Why did you come?" he asked when the guard brought him into the visiting room. "I wanted to tell you something," I said, "about my father's last days." Patrick flinched but didn't look away. "He was in pain," I continued. Constant, terrible pain that morphed into something they couldn't control anymore. But he never complained, never asked why this was happening to him. He just kept fighting, kept believing that the work he was doing mattered. "Harper, I'm not finished," I said firmly. "When I asked you for emergency leave, when I begged you to show some basic human compassion, you told me that my personal problems weren't the company's responsibility. Do you remember that?" He nodded miserably. "Well, I have news for you. Patrick, your personal problems aren't my responsibility either. But I'm going to show you the compassion you never showed me." He looked up, confused. "I'm not going to take pleasure in your suffering," I said. "I'm not going to gloat about your downfall or celebrate your imprisonment, because unlike you, I'm still human. I still believe that everyone deserves basic dignity, even people who've done terrible things." Tears were running down Patrick's face now. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. What I did to your father. If I could take it back. You can't take it back, I said. But you can do something else. You can testify truthfully at trial. You can help prosecutors build their cases against your associates. You can make sure that every person you've hurt gets justice. He nodded frantically. Yes, I'll do whatever they ask. I'll tell them everything. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. Patrick, there's one more thing you should know. That recording device you gave me in the parking lot, it helped us identify and arrest 47 other people involved in your network, corrupt officials, money launderers, organized crime figures, an entire criminal enterprise that's now facing justice because you decided to cooperate. His eyes widened. 47 people. Your insurance policy turned out to be very comprehensive, I said. Almost like you'd been planning to expose them all along. It wasn't true. Of course, Patrick had only cooperated because he'd been cornered and desperate. But I wanted him to believe that his final act had been one of redemption rather than just self-preservation. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The anger I'd carried since Dad's death, the burning need for revenge, it was gone, replaced by something quieter but more enduring. The satisfaction of justice served. 6 months later, I graduated from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia, officially becoming an undercover investigator for the Anti-Fraud Commission. My first assignment would take me to Seattle, where a shipping company was suspected of running a sophisticated smuggling operation. It was the kind of case Dad would have loved. Complex, challenging, and with the potential to protect countless innocent people from exploitation. As I packed my belongings for the move west, I found his letter again, the one he'd left in the safe. The question is, what will you do with it? He'd written about the evidence he'd gathered. I'd found my answer. I would do what he'd done. Use the truth as a weapon against those who preyed on the innocent. I would carry on his work, his mission, his belief that justice was worth any sacrifice. And someday, when my own career was over, I hoped I could say what I knew Dad would say if he could see me now, that I'd made the world a little bit better, one case at a time. The man who'd denied me the chance to say goodbye to my dying father had unknowingly set me on a path that would define the rest of my life. In trying to destroy me, Patrick Doyle had created his own nemesis. In the end, his cruelty hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something stronger. And that, I thought as I drove toward my new life, was the most poetic justice of all.